Hi, everybody. My name is Florent Buisson, and it is a pleasure to join you today at Experiment Nation to talk to you about vendor evaluation. So in theory, vendor evaluation is a very rational and logical process where we identify success criteria, we identify option, we talk about trade-off, and then after having selected the objectively best option, we can successfully ride into the sunset. That is the theory. But for anyone who has been involved into any real life vendor evaluation, it can feel much more hectic and difficult. And the key to really have a successful vendor evaluation is to recognize the nature of the process. Vendor evaluation is a very political process, and you can survive it and be successful by being somewhat political yourself. And the guiding principle I have for this, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but I think is really the key, is to take ownership of the process. So what step will be taken in what order with whom, which people will try to take away from you. And on the other hand, to reject ownership of the outcome. So which of the tool is selected, you do not want to be held responsible for that, and people will try to hold you responsible for that. So again, try to take ownership of the process and try to not take ownership of the outcome is kind of the guiding principle that I think can really help you. Let's see what I mean by that. So the thing is that vendor evaluation is, even though it may feel like a process that is like in a short period of time, it's really should start a long time ahead. So what you should do is like a lot of time in advance, 6, 12 months, start tapping the institutional memory. And unless this is the very first vendor evaluation that your company does, there have been a prior one, hopefully a few years ago, when the current vendor was selected. And so asking people who were there at the time how it went can be very helpful to understand what were the criteria, what were the players, what happened, and why. And it's really an opportunity to capture both objective and subjective data to get a sense of what were on paper the criteria that were important for the choice, but also who spoke the loudest, which were the stakeholders who were fighting with each other. And so tapping that institutional memory can really give you a sense of the what the field ahead of you is like and where the landmines are. And so really starting 6 to 12 months ahead of time, once you have tapped your um, institutional memory and you have a bit of a sense of what you might expect to happen, then you can start planning ahead. So, and the steps are to onboard stakeholders before getting down to the list of options. And onboarding the stakeholder is the part I will take the longest by far about because it is the most important. And then at the end, you need to factor some buffer time to sign the contract. There will probably be some back and forth between stakeholder, legal, the vendor, and then there will be some time needed to implement the tool. So even though your role might be to select the vendor to make sure we get a vendor selected, you need to work backward from the target implementation date to make sure that you have the tool in place when needed. And so that is partly why you really need to start thinking about it 6 months or ideally 12 months ahead of time.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago, founder of Experimentation. To celebrate our 5th anniversary, we are holding weekly giveaways until November 29th. Prizes include books, free consultation services, and even a t-shirt. To enter, simply join Experimentation Slack and fill out the entry form that can be found in the description or through the QR code on the screen. Now back to the session.
So now to get into the work and again, especially the stakeholder, because it is, in my opinion, the most important piece. So the first piece is to get all the right people around the table and all the wrong people not in the table. And one thing that is important to recognize is that in organization, decisions are collective. Even though you may feel like, well, uh, this is the part of the role of the VP of engineering to choose this tool, or the VP of product should choose this tool. Like, no one really wants to be making decision all by themselves in an organization, for good reason, because first of all, they don't want to be held responsible if something goes wrong, but also they do genuinely, hopefully, they genuinely want to take into account the need of their peers and the other part of the organization. And so if you're not a VP and your job is to facilitate that process, this is where you can really shine by helping run that process efficiently. So the key role, as you can see, I've taken the RACI, typical RACI role, and I've added the budget owner. So let's see what these are and how they fit together. So the first one is the budget owner. And the budget owner is really important because like I said, no one wants to be the single decision maker who is going to be held responsible. That's scary. But the closest proxy to that is whose budget is the money going to come from? Like if you're buying a new analytics, like product analytics or customer analytics tool, the money might come out of the product budget, marketing budget, engineering budget. And what that means is that ultimately the person who owns that budget will be the person signing the check or telling finance to sign the check. And so they are really the decision maker, but asking who owns the budget will be much less scary than asking who is going to um, make the decision. So that is the key person you need to identify, the budget owner. Then you have all of the people that the budget owner want or need to consult. So they want approval or input for their peers in the relevant function. So here you can suggest some name, but basically it's everybody that the budget owner wants only to have involved in the decision. Because again, if the budget owner is, say, a VP in a certain area, their boss in the C-suite would probably want them to have a cross-section of the organization involved. And once you have identified the budget owner and made a list of the people who are responsible, then together that forms your steering committee. This is the group of people who will together sign off on the final decision. And so this is the really important organ to have. And one thing that is crucial at this step is to get alignment from the member of the steering committee of who should be included and not included in the steering committee. This way, once you have gotten that agreement, this way, if, say, the VP of finance later on comes and complains, oh, I was not selected to be part of the steering committee, even though I should have been, then you can refer them to the member of the steering committee and they will discuss it between themselves. Like you do not want to be the person in charge of held responsible for the membership of the steering committee. and you really want to get the steering committee member to agree on who's in and who's out, ideally in a kickoff session. However, obviously, all those VPs are way too busy to actually get really involved in the decision making, in the process, the evaluation itself. And so what that means is that they will assign people in their respective organization to manage the details and so on. And so if the steering committee is typically composed of VP or higher people, the lower layer of the accountable people is typically at the senior manager or director level. And uh, even if you are not at that level yet, those are essentially, for the purpose of this project, your peers as the project team and the people you will be interacting most directly with to move things forward. Then you have the consultant, I mean, not even layer, but cloud, because this can really uh, encompass a variety of people and function across the organization. And so what is the difference in our case between the people who are accountable and the people who are consulted is that essentially the people who are consulted are providing uh, broader context, constraint. And so, for example, legal or compliance might say, this tool needs to be HIPAA compliant. That is not to say that they will have a vote or that they will be actually consulted on should we pick option one or option two. Um, it is to say that you should meet with them to gather their insight and their constraint and their goal and document it somewhere so that you can provide that information to the all the people in the task force and the people in the steering committee. So having all of those meetings you have documented is a very good, very important insurance policy to make sure that people don't come back to you and ask, well, what about legal? What about procurement? Did you ask them? Then you should be able to uh, respond clearly and confidently. Yes, I spoke to legal. Yes, I spoke to procurement. Here's what they said. But you really ideally don't want them to be more involved in that because then that will make your process much more complicated. Obviously, human beings are human beings, and so you might not want to tell people too explicitly what the status is, but that needs to be really clear in your own mind. In your own mind, you need to be really clear about who you consider accountable, and that is typically the people who are reporting it up to the members of the steering committee, and who is consulted. They provide some input, but they don't have a say in the decision per se. And then finally, in terms of informing other people in the organization, here it is really over communicate, over communicate, over communicate. Like if you have a chance to get into company town hall or team monthly or quarterly meeting, even if it's just to show one or two slides and to say, hey, this is what's happening. Here's the deadline for the implementation 9 months in the future. And here is where we are at. This is going to be very helpful to make sure that you don't have any surprise. Because, for example, by keeping everybody informed, you might have some people crawling out of the woodwork who actually have important information and should be consulted into the process. And so, really, again, like I said, establishing the proper list of stakeholders is the most important part. And you can see we are 3/4 of the way through the presentation, and I am only now getting to the long list of options. Because the truth is, the people who are involved are way more important than the list of options. Establishing the long list is really a pretty simple if tedious process because you should include the current solution as a baseline, and you should include the solution used by any relevant team. So, for example, if marketing has a different tool for the same function, you want to have that in the list so that if someone asks, what about this tool? What about that tool? You can say, yes, they are in the list. And similarly, if you have anybody in the steering committee or in the task force who has some like favorite or solution they've worked with in the past that they really like, you really want to include them. Here, you want to be as exhaustive as possible um, without exhausting yourself. And already, as you consult the people around you in the process to establish the long list, you will start getting a sense of the criteria and preferences. And that is the part where you really want to listen to the motivation. So, for example, if it is, oh, I really like this solution because I used it in my previous company, and it is very simple for self-service, or I use this tool and it is really cheap. You want to really take those into consideration because that will give you a sense of what are the criteria that will be important to them, to your stakeholder. And then once you have this long list, and it can literally just be a list, like bullet point, name of vendor one, bullet point, name of vendor two, and like even if it's 12 names, it is 12 names. You don't need to evaluate all of them in depth, but you want to make sure you have all the names you need to have on that long list. And then you will probably have a sense of what are the top 5 or 6 contenders. So is the current solution being seriously considered for renewal or not? Is there like one of the key stakeholder who will really have an important word in the final decision, pushing really hard on a certain solution? So really, even though your whole list might have 12 names, you probably have only 5 or 6 most serious contenders. And so you can ask these to do a demo, record the demo, send the links to the steering committee. Most of them will probably not watch the demos recording. Uh, some of people in the accountable layer might, but it is important that you make them available so you can say, hey, we consider this vendor, we did a demo, you could consult the demo when you want. And then, ironically, going from the long list to the short list, which in a way, in the rational vision of vendor evaluation would be the most important step, is kind of a little bit of an afterthought and will probably go by fairly quickly in reality. But this is also an important step where you can try to gently nudge the steering committee by pushing for a certain tool to make it into the a short list, or on the other hand, to not make it into the short list. Again, it's not your decision. It will be the decision of the accountable people, and the steering committee will have to sign off on it. But you can actually have quite a lot of influence at that stage. And that is really the stage where you can have the most, that is the most important if you have solution that you think are the really best one, because people will not fight you too hard, typically on the inclusion in the short list. But if it's not in the short list, it's not going to be a potential contender to be the final option. One thing I will say is that you really want to make sure you get a short list, because in some cases, and that has happened to me, a stakeholder might say, hey, how about we just evaluate this vendor, this single vendor, and if it doesn't work, we will go back to others. And that's really something you want to avoid, because even if there are issues discovered further down the road, there will be immense pressure to just finish the process. There might not even be enough time to evaluate another vendor, and you might end up with a suboptimal vendor. So you really want to have a short list with a few options, and ideally, but it is usually possible, you want to get the steering committee to sign off on the short list and provide kind of their opinion on the different tools in the short list in a meeting that you will document. Because then you can say, if anybody comes back later and say, well, why was this tool not uh, like included in the short list? You can say, well, the steering committee picked this and that tool for this reason. And so you can kind of uh, use that meeting and that sign off as a shield. And then once you have the short list, this is where you want to do deep dive with the contenders and like the vendor that might make it into the short list. And like you really want to be super careful with the words that the vendor use. So if they say that something is on their roadmap, you need to treat that as it is not available. It may be later, it may not. And don't get fooled by sales pitch like best in class and stuff. You really want to be talking to the technical specialist, not the sales rep who don't know the technical details. And so that's where you really need to get in depth into the tool, because if the steering committee makes a decision uh, based on bad information, that is your responsibility. That is a step where you need to really know what's going on. But then going from the short list to the final vendor is usually going to be, again, pretty fast and pretty smooth, because the steering committee members will kind of figure it out between themselves, and it is to a significant extent like up to them and out of your hand. If I will say, if the price is appear to be too much of a factor, you might want to gently nudge on like, hey, this one is more expensive, but it is really much more powerful. Or if the steering committee is thinking about a tool but you foresee some problem, you really want to be outlining conditions for it to work. So you don't want to say, no, we shouldn't choose this option. Cannot say no to VPs, but you want to say, yes, and yes, this tool can work, and we would need additional headcount to make it work. And again, you really want to document all of this, because even though it is their decision and they will be responsible for it, if you have organized the process correctly, you will still have to live with the outcome. And so you want to make sure that you can really uh, protect yourself if things go wrong later on. So here it is. So to recap, you really want to own the process, and especially do the shepherding of who will be involved in what capacity, because this is how you will ensure that you will have a smooth process. But then you want to really make sure that the decisions are explicitly made by the steering committee or their delegate, whereas people might say, okay, Florent should choose between those two options. No, you might frame it as, well, my recommendation is this tool, but you really don't want it to be phrased as you making the decision. So getting the right people involved is crucial. And at the end of the day, the truth is that vendor evaluation is a bit of a thankless task. But if you do it well, it can really position you for leadership and position you as like director material or VP material if you are not at that level yet. So thank you for listening to me. If you want to hear or read more of what I say, you can follow me on LinkedIn, on Medium, where I post, well, infrequently, but still hopefully more frequently soon. You can read my books, Getting Started with Adobe Target, a gentle introduction for web analysts, and my book about customer analytics and experimentation, which is titled Behavioral Data Analysis with R and Python. So thank you very much for listening to me, and have a good rest of your day.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago, founder of Experiment Nation. To celebrate our 5th anniversary, we are holding weekly giveaways until November 29th. Prizes include books, free consultation services, and even a t-shirt. To enter, simply join Experiment Nation Slack and fill out the entry form that can be found in the description or through the QR code on the screen.